My name is Thanks for Loot. I've been on MCME around about 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. I specialize in organics, and that is why I got pretty heavily into trees, and that's what we'll be building today, is some ash trees.
My name is LordReavanPlays, and I'm a guide on the server, and I've been around the server for about 3 years now.
Hello, I'm Green Giant. I'm a commoner on the server, and this is my first tree. So we'll show you just how to build one. Even I can build it.
All right, so what I wanted to do first was go over the custom inventory and some of the blocks that come along with it in the new tree pack. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but I promise that it's actually a lot simpler than it looks at first glance when you're looking at a tree. If you don't know how to open your custom inventory, the default key, I believe, is F. It's whatever your shield key is, I think. And if you go ahead and tap that, you'll see some tabs at the top. We're going to go to the tree tab. And for this tree, we're going to be pulling from the ash blocks. Easiest way to see all the ash blocks is to go ahead and right-click on any of the ash tree blocks that you'll see in the top left there. If you do so, you'll be able to pull out any of the different full blocks, stairs, slabs, leaves if you need them, and the branch segments. So let's go over some of the custom blocks that we have here. For the most part, you should be able to recognize blocks that you would use for building all the other stuff that you'd normally build in Minecraft. You got your full blocks, your wall blocks, your slabs, your upright slabs, which are pretty pervasive in MCME, your stairs, excuse me, and your trapdoors, which in the case of the trees are only going to be the vertical trapdoors. The kind of interesting pieces that you've got for your tree building now are these offset blocks. So you've got your offset full block and your offset half block. And these are really useful for adding curves to the trunk of your trees. You'll see that a bunch in the examples that I have over there, but it helps both to kind of plump out the thickness of your trunks in an organic way, as well as to curve them so that you can have a more visually interesting tree. The other important pieces that you're going to be working with are these branch pieces over here. If you look in the custom inventory, you'll see them described as branch 45 and branch 22, as well as the branch horizontal. Those describe the angles that you're going to be using the branches at. And we're going to be using these to kind of handle the upper parts of the trunks in a lot of cases, as well as all the branches coming off the main part of the trunk. You can see that I've placed them around this block, and the real reason I've done this is because the angle that you are facing when you place it matters. So if I was to place this block here from this direction, it's going to face this way, whereas if I go from here, it's going to face this way, and so forth. So it's important to be facing the correct direction when you place your trunks, or your branches. The other important thing to note with these is that if you are holding one of the branch segments in your hand and you shift right click on one of the branches, you can toggle it between the thick and thin variants. This is really useful for creating the thinner parts of branches at the end of branches. And you'll find, for the most part, as we build these trees, that you'll use the thin ones a lot because you only want to use these thicker ones really close to the trunk of the tree. Other than that, you've got your horizontal ones, which you can do the same trick with. You can make them thick or thin. And these branch end segments, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but they're useful for creating the illusion of that kind of detail that you get at the end of branches where there's a bunch of twigs moving off in all directions. The last pieces that you're going to have here are the leaf blocks, which we'll be using. You've got the full block, which is as normal, and then you've got your slabs, which can also be placed, let me go ahead and just give an example of this, upright as well. So up vertical as well. And we'll be using a combination of all three of these things in order to create some rounded structures of the leaves. So with that, we're going to move on to step number 1. And step number 1 is about building the base trunk. This is going to be kind of all the thicker elements that make up the trunk. We're going to not do branches quite yet, but you can see that there's a couple of different ways you can build a tree. Some of the trees that we've used in the past have been very vertical, so not twisty, and they tend to not have these kind of forked splits closer to the top. By no means do you have to do a forked split. This tree was just trying to be representative of all the different things that you could be doing with your tree. So what I would suggest in this step is to build kind of the base of your trunk and start thick and kind of move to get thinner as you move up the tree. So as I mentioned, you want to use your thicker pieces towards the top and then kind of towards the bottom, and then kind of taper out towards the top, starting to use the thinner pieces. As I mentioned before, you really want to try to use the offset blocks in combination with the, I guess, standardly placed blocks in order to kind of create these curves instead of doing something like this, which you might have done previously, you know, or, well, of course. Oh, that's actually something we can go over about interesting pieces with the blocks. For some of these stair blocks, go ahead and just place them on the ground and then middle click them to get them again. For whatever reason, if you pull them out of the custom inventory, they will not place upside down. So I'd forgotten about that, but that's true with some of the variants. So yeah, instead of kind of curving like this, right, we want to try to use these offset blocks to create a smoother curve. And you can do that with a combination of both the full blocks and the skinnier blocks as well as you move up. So something that I'll often do is branch off of thick ones with thin ones as I kind of get towards the top, as you're seeing with that forked structure that we have up here. But yeah, something else that's probably worth doing is at this thicker part of your trunk right at the base is try to give the kind of suggestion of a root structure. I wouldn't build the roots out super long using all these different pieces, but what I would do is kind of get that shape right at the bottom that looks like the roots are going to be kind of entering the ground at that point. You know what I'm talking about. It's a tapered feel. So this is the thick part of the taper. There's a couple of different ways that you can accomplish this, but some of the easier ways is just to do something like put an offset block followed by a slab. You can kind of see that curves down into the ground pretty nicely. You don't have to do that every time. Obviously, you can just have it look like this with the root being a little bit more vertical, but it's worth messing around with that quite a bit to kind of get the feel for your trunk. So step 2 is about adding the main branches to the tree, kind of all the thicker and thinner bits that are going to be supporting the end parts of the branches and eventually all of the leaves. We want to ensure that all of these main offshoots are coming off the main trunk itself, and it's important to remember that with trees, they grow upward and outward in all directions, searching for nutrients, which means the branches are going to project from as many directions as they can. What I would say with that is, in order to create visual interest and to make it feel more like a tree, you definitely want to have the branches coming off the tree at varying heights, right? So for example, if the top of your tree or a part of your tree looked like this, and then you had your branches kind of coming off the same part of the tree, right? This starts to look pretty unnatural, right? You can do that in 1 or 2 places, but if you start to do it like this, it's going to look kind of silly. So what I would do is, to avoid this, just, you know, vary the heights at which your branches come off the tree and the angles at which they come off the tree so that you can get a more organic feel to the branches and make it feel like they actually grew up over time as the tree grew upward. The other thing that I would try to avoid with branches is to avoid repeating the same piece twice in a row. Again, there is always exceptions to the rule, but you'll see with this structure that I've built here, anytime that I have placed a new segment attaching to an old segment, I have either changed the direction of the piece, changed the piece itself, or at least made it go from the thick to the thin variant, as I did here. I think you'll find again that if you build a branch that kind of has too many pieces of the A1 type moving in the same direction, it'll start to look kind of unnatural and unwieldy, which is what you're trying to avoid. So instead, you would take something like the vertical piece, maybe, and add it here, you know, and then you can use the same piece to branch upward if you want. But it looks at least a little bit more natural when you do something like that. It's important to make sure that you're using a combination of the thick and thin branches. I see a lot of people who start building trees use almost entirely the thick, and you kind of want to use the opposite philosophy. The thick branches are really for right where it branches off of the trunk, and then they very quickly kind of become thinner as they move out from the tree. And the other big thing is to try to avoid symmetry as much as you can. So you can see, again, that we've kind of got the branches coming off at all different parts of the tree, at all different angles, and we don't use the same piece twice in a row to create that really natural tangle of growth. At this stage, don't worry too much about detailing. We'll do that in the next stage. And don't forget, you can always add branches and stuff to your tree as you kind of build it out in the other steps if it starts to feel lopsided.
So for this, it seems like they're also all coming out around the top of these forks. Is there any reason why we do something like this where we make it come out closer to the base, or is this just an example of that?
That just happens to be how I built this one. For example, if you wanted to also just have like a branch coming out here, right? Right, then you could have done that as well. There's nothing wrong with having it not be at the top of the branch. right? So that right there would be a perfectly valid way of doing it. Don't feel like you're locked into having it always come out of the top of a branch. You can, have it come horizontally out of the trunk as well. If you're asking why there's not branches down here, it's going to vary tree to tree, but I'd say putting branches too close to the ground for a lot of these trees will make the tree start to feel cluttered. Isn't the right word, but for a lot of these trees, you want some space to kind of get in up under them. Obviously, over here, you'll see that's not as true with the weeping beech. The branches hang a lot closer to the ground, and that's a little bit more normal. But for the ash tree, anyway, you probably want your branches to start at least a third of the way up the trunk. All right, so we're going to go on to step 3, which is the kind of detailing step. You'll see that here, most of what I've done is kind of add a couple more thinner pieces to the ends of branches, as well as add the branches themselves. This is a step that it can be a little bit easy to overdo. Something that you've seen me do here is almost every branch has ended in one of these branch end pieces, which you don't necessarily have to do. You can always, end it in a stub of a branch as well. In fact, it's possible that I should have done that a little bit more with this tree. But it is important to kind of use these fanning out from the inside of the tree to, again, we're growing outwards, and we want shelves to be able to hold all of our leaves. You'll see, again, I've avoided symmetry, but you see that I've kind of designated some of these different shelves in which I'm going to build the leaves upon. So you can see that these 4 branches kind of build a shelf here. These 2 are another shelf, these 2 are another shelf. And that's helpful for figuring out later where you're going to lay your leaves.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's really clever.
They look like they're almost hands holding it up.
Yeah.
I see that now.
Yep. Again, not the only way to do this, but certainly the nicest way that I've found to kind of lay out your tree going forward. When you're placing these branch ends, again, where you're facing matters, and you want them, for the most part, to be facing out from the tree instead of inwards towards the tree. Something else to be aware of as you're building your branches, if you put the branches right next to one another, let's say like this, that's actually not too bad. But if I was to do it on this side, you'll start to see that it looks a little bit cluttered. Sometimes you'll see the branches starting to clip with one another, and that starts to look bad. So what I tend to do, sometimes I'll have them next to one another like this, but if you want to avoid that, obviously just add another horizontal piece, and then you can slap your branch at the end of that, and it'll look a little bit better, a little bit more natural. You don't have to add a horizontal piece too. You could have added like one of these, and then a branch coming out like that. But something to, not have them so tightly packed together, I would say. Something that's nice to remember is you don't have to do this again, but both myself and Joske, whatever, my Joske, new designer guy, have found that it's nice to have at least one branch structure that kind of forms the top of your canopy. You'll kind of see this with a lot of trees, but if you don't do that, it'll look a little bit odd if you have kind of a hole down the middle of your tree and a big donut of leaves around it. So you might not get it right away, but you definitely want to have kind of a top segment of branches that kind of covers the top and gives you a little shelf right here at the top to build around, right in the middle of the tree. The leaves are kind of the step that I see people struggle with the most, which is where you guys are probably going to have a lot of your learning curve. The leaves can be a little bit weird to kind of get placed feeling right, but what we're going for, especially with this ash tree, is, as I mentioned before, these kind of rounded shelves. And you'll see on the later examples that I've kind of created this almost like upside down bowl looking structure. You kind of want it to be the outside of the leaf structure to be rounded, not entirely rounded, but vaguely rounded. We're going to accomplish that with slabs and full blocks, as well as the top to be rounded as well. So what I tend to do in the first stage is to go to each of my shelves and lay out the rounded structure of the outside of it, just the outside, for each shelf. And then I kind of mock out where the top of the bowl is going, or I guess in this case, the bottom of the upturned bowl is going to be, and the slope that leads down towards the outside of the tree. I'll show an example of me building that over here because it'll be easier to see. But if I'm going to take, for example, this shelf, for the ash tree, what I tend to do is build a couple out and then kind of do a rough jagged outline of how I might connect those branches. Again, we're trying to avoid symmetry, but you're trying to get the right idea for it. And then use slabs to fill it in to make it feel a little bit more rounded, like so. And then you want to try to close in the outside of the leaves, heading back towards the tree itself. Again, doesn't have to be fully rounded, but with that in mind, so that you can kind of create this shelf that doesn't look too blocky. This would be kind of the outline that I'd make for this shelf. And then when I talked about building the kind of outline of the slope for your bowl, you're going to want to kind of figure out where you want it to curve upwards, just in a couple of places. And the reason we're doing that is later we can then just kind of connect the dots. And then I would maybe curve it like this. So that you've got this, you can very quickly see this kind of rounded shape starts to form. You don't need to do the same rounded shape for each one that you lay out, but it's good to have an idea generally of how rounded you want the top to be. And if we do this in a couple of places, then when we go to fill in the blocks in the next step, you'll have a pretty good outline of where you need to place all your leaves to get them to connect with one another. I guess I'll mention this not for the ash trees in general, but it's worth noting that, again, every tree has a different branch structure, a different way that we build the trunks, and especially a different leaf structure. So what I'm saying here isn't definitive for all trees, but it's certainly something to think about as you're building the trees.
Would it be a good idea for beginners to maybe build out of wool instead of leaves to get an idea on the shape? Because the leaves can be a little bit difficult to see where they don't properly connect together.
You could absolutely do that. Something to remember, though, is that part of what we're using to create this rounded structure is the vertical setting of the trapdoor, as well as the horizontal for the top parts. So if you did build it out of wool, you'd be using a combination of the two anyway.
Yeah.
But we do a similar technique with some of our other trees, where we build out of other blocks instead in order to see it better. You'll see that if we ever build a European beach, I use that strategy. So this step is really just about filling in the bowls that we created. But again, you're just using the outlines that you gave yourself to fill in the missing pieces, create the slope all the way around, for the most part, to create the top of the bowl structure. The only thing that I can really say here is to do your best to make sure that it retains its kind of rounded shape on the outside, as well as moving towards the top of the bowl. And make sure, again, that you're using a bunch of asymmetry in the way that you place the block so it doesn't look perfectly rounded. We kind of want to use a bunch of different pieces here, both the slabs, the horizontal slabs, the vertical slabs, and the full blocks to make it look bushy, so that from far away it looks rounded, but when you get close up, you can see that there's clearly not any real pattern to how you're placing the blocks. Or rather, how you're varying the height. There should be a pattern to how you're placing the blocks, but not how you're varying the height. A big part of this step is try not to fill in all the blocks on the underside. You kind of want to leave a hollow gap in there for a couple of reasons. A, because we definitely want to get to a point where we don't want to like a solid wall of leaves, right? We want to have some kind of light shining through. I still need to do a little bit of a better job figuring out how we're going to remove some of the leaves without it looking silly. But for the most part, I would just say when you're building your tree, don't fill in the leaves all the way on the bottom. So build in this, kind of structure if you have to, while still leaving a gap under here to do some detailing work later, and or just let some of the light through. Again, this step and the step before it are the steps that are going to probably take the most to get right. And you can place your leaves however you want, but I would suggest starting with my method, because if you kind of just place them at random, you'll get some kind of wonky looking leaf structures and might have to do it over again. So the last real step here is the detailing step for the leaves. If you kind of back up a little bit from the trees and just look at them like horizontal on, you'll see that there's a pretty big difference in the way that the tree feels. And the reason is because we detailed the underside of the leaves. It's not going to require that many blocks to do so, but you'll go from this kind of flat feeling bottom to the trees to this very kind of fluffy, weighty feeling to the leaves. And the way that we do that is by adding kind of a series of full and half blocks on the outer rim to make it feel like the weight of the leaves is making the whole branch structure in the shelf droop a little bit. So you can see that I've kind of used a combination of stuff like a full block surrounded by two slabs to kind of start to make it feel like it's hanging off a little bit, giving it that weighty feeling. This stage, again, it doesn't require that many blocks, but getting the feel right can take a little bit of time, and it's kind of the most important step for really giving it that fluffy leaf feel. It makes a huge difference. The other thing you're going to be doing during this step is ensuring that in most places the leaves feel like they connect to the branches themselves. So when we built this hollow outline in the previous tree, there's going to be a bunch of places where it feels like there's just kind of a big gap where the tree branches aren't really touching the leaves, and we want to try to eliminate that some, so it feels like the leaves are actually growing out of the tree and not just kind of hovering next to it. So the last step that we have here is just something that I always want to make a reminder on for any build, but definitely for trees, is review your build when you're done, right? See if it feels right to you. And in this case, I built this entire tree and then got to the end and felt like there was this big empty open space on this side of the tree that made the tree feel lopsided. Like, we want it to be asymmetrical, but we don't want it to feel like it's completely lopsided. This look could work, could be right for some kind of tree, and I could have stopped here and that would be fine, but it didn't feel right to me. So what I did is repeat all the steps just to add this little forked branch structure over here on this side, and then add the leaves to that. And if you kind of step back, I think you'll agree that it feels more complete.
Makes a massive difference.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going for, and I'd say just always make sure to review your tree. Step back, see it from a bunch of angles. I know you guys have been on the server for a while, so that's probably something that's second nature to you guys, but for anybody who wants to build trees or any other structure, make sure you see it from every angle and really step back and review your process. The other thing you can do at this stage if you want is to add some of the mossy block variants that you can find in the RP for each of the different tree types. So if I wanted to, I could then go back and replace some of the full blocks with more mossy variants. I would keep these basically just to the bottom of the tree. You don't want to use them everywhere, but moss will grow up from the bottom of the tree. So just a couple of those blocks can make a little bit of a difference in making the tree feel a little bit more natural. Cool, so do you guys have any questions about building an ash tree now that you've seen my whole process?
When can we start?
Right away. You guys have your plots that we've set up, and I will be building a tree right alongside you. And if you have any questions, obviously I will be here to answer them.
Have you built a tree before, Reavan?
I don't think I've built any good ones before. I did try and build one for the Nindolf when that project was still going on, but I never really got the hang of it. So I haven't really built much other than this so far. Have you built any trees other than this?
Only with the old tree system, and it was very, very poor. Not my finest work. It looks very daunting when you first see it, but when you break it down into those little stages, you can actually see how it all comes together and what the thought process is. Lou, I've noticed I'm getting a lot of Z fighting when I use the full blocks and the offset blocks together.
You are going to get some Z fighting when working with this pack. Luckily, you won't be able to see it from very far away, so that kind of mitigates some of it. Something that I will say is that if you're using the upright slabs alongside the offset blocks, that's when you're going to see it the most. A little bit with the stairs, but mostly with the upright slabs. Something that you've got going on here is that you've got a little bit, your trunk was looking a little bit blocky there and square. And you can always obviously fix that like you just did by kind of removing one piece or another. Try to remember to keep it thickest at the bottom and then kind of taper up as you taper out, get thinner as it goes up.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm having a little trouble with that root structure you were mentioning before. I kind of used two of the ways that you mentioned before to get it kind of look like it's flowing down, but I feel like I want to mix it up a little bit or do something, but I'm not sure what to do.
Something that's probably you're struggling with the way the root structure looks right now is that the bottom of your trunk is only 1 block thick. Even making it 1.5 blocks thick will make the root structure coming off of it look just a little bit more natural. I would say going to 2 blocks thick out with the full blocks is a little bit odd, but what you could do is start to use the upright slabs in a couple of places to kind of give it a little bit of thickness in 1 or 2 directions to make it feel a little bit more thick. And don't forget, you can also use the trapdoors to taper in the half blocks a little bit to make it feel even more natural.
All right.
What's everyone's favorite type of tree?
There's a good question that I don't readily have an answer to.
I think I've always kind of liked willow trees.
Those are good.
Those are
Yeah,
cool.
the leaves are always really nice, but then the way the branches move is very smooth, but also very they move in a bunch of different directions, and it's peaceful chaos in a way.
I like a bonsai tree. I don't know if they're technically trees, but I just think they're such a cool idea. A mini tree.
Oh, you know what's a really cool looking tree too? Have you ever heard of a monkey puzzle tree?
Ooh,
Can't say
sounds
that I have.
fancy.
It's I don't really know how to describe it, but it's got this like weird button. It looks like it's got a bunch of buttons all over it, pretty much. And then it's got these really wacky branches. And it's just a really funky looking tree. So if you ever have the urge to look up some trees, look up the monkey puzzle tree.
Looks like you've got the right kind of idea. You are thinning out your trees as they go up. Something you'll notice here is if this feels like it's a jagged kind of transition moving up this part of the tree, something that you could do instead is use the thinner blocks to do the transition. And then you'd have to do the same on this side with the thin block, and then you just have to find the correct place to place the full block again, like that. And it can make that transition feel a little bit neater. Or it cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could also, or you could use, if you wanted to do here instead of that block, you could use a slab if that looks better to you, but to me, I'm not sure. So
Yeah, I like that version better.
Yep.
It's got that more tiered kind of look.
Yep. And if that wasn't what you were going for, then obviously revert my change, and it's fine.
Does anyone have some good tree puns? I think if we do them for the rest of the video, we should only do them occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah.
Uh-oh. I'll definitely spruce up the video.
And if we do enough of them, maybe the audience will be pining for more afterwards.
I have to ask you to stop. Oh, that was ask you to stop.
Oh.
Yeah.
But I think these are okay.
Okay. Oh.
We could call the video the elementaries of tree making.
Doing these branches are the hardest part.
Hmm.
This is like really... I'm really struggling with this. I don't think the viewers want to watch me struggle building these branches.
That would be great.
Oh,
just like a minute and a half of just like outro music with him moving at 10 times speed, building branches.
That'll be the bloopers.
You could do the what's it called? Yakety Sax, the Benny Hill theme.
Well, yeah, you could do that.
Exactly.
Would you say this is like okay for a basic branch structure?
Yes, I think you'll find as you build that stuff's going to feel a little claustrophobic and a little bit too close to one another. So I would suggest building your branches that spread a little bit farther out from the tree. I think the other thing that you'll find, and you can fix later, is that you've only got branches currently at the top of your tree, which will make it feel very empty near the bottom.
Yeah. Okay.
He's wearing these sunglasses and this chain, and like he looks super goofy, and then his friend just punches him.
Longer.
They didn't do anything wrong, bro. Alderaan had it coming.
What did they do wrong? Never
Alderaan had
single
it
thing.
coming.
Wow. Alderaan had been mouthing off for years, okay?
The Death Star.
Here we go.
So okay.
Now you started
Okay,
it.
cracking my knuckles. I think we're gonna have to apologize to Ginger after this.
And I've accepted that I am an outcast. What have I done?
There's certainly a lot of nonsense going on here.
Oh, yeah, we're going bowling for sure.
I believe in myself. You'd be surprised. I've seen some
busty trees. All
some
right.
busty trees, man.
Wow. Does this look alright?
So what I'll say is that you've ended up with very flat leaf structure instead of the kind of the rounded one we're talking about. Let's just say I've got a tree branch or whatever. If I've decided that my branch structure is going to be like this, I guess. Let's say it's this. It's not a very good branch structure, but I go to the plus sign that makes up the wall piece that is the branch. I go, let's start with up 2, out 2, and I stack like this. So you end up with 6 blocks. And then if you put these like that, you'll see the curve.
Oh, I see that now.
Yep. So
It's got
up
the-
2, out 2, stack, and curve.
I'm
Yeah.
happy with mine. Yeah.
Satisfied?
I'm happy. The tree turned out way better than I was ever expecting, so yeah, I'm quite chuffed.
Excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
Yay! Have we graduated from the loot school of tree making?
Well, you certainly can go on to 201.
Oh. Yay!
One tree does not a forest make.
Gotta put that one in quotes.
I mean, let's just say you've moved from, like, youngling to Padawan, yeah?
Okay.
I can get down with that. Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, I was gonna say.